The Prime Minister has fired the starting gun for a vote on Britain's membership of the EU by promising a referendum within the next 2 years, the first chance for the public to vote directly on the issue for 4 decades. In June 1975, over two-thirds of British voters supported remaining in what was then the European Economic Community. In 1993, the Maastricht Treaty created the European Union and formulated a new currency, the euro. 40 years since the last vote, David Cameron now promises another referendum by the end of 2017, following a renegotiation of our membership. The question on the ballot paper will be, should the UK remain a member of the EU? The total amount of money sent to the EU by the UK over the year 2014-15 was forecast to be £19 billion. But we'll get about £9 billion of that back through agricultural subsidies and thousands of grants to organisations across the UK, as well as a rebate once the annual EU budget is determined. Going head-to-head on Britain's membership of the European Union, the Conservative backbencher Philip Davies, who wants Britain to leave the EU, and Laura Sands, former Conservative MP, who chairs the European Movement Group and is in favour of Britain staying in. Let me give you each 30 seconds just to lay out your stall on the headlines of your position. Start with you, Laura Sands.
Well, I think it's absolutely crucial. If you think that every single job in this country is probably 7 degrees of separation from some form of export, I think we've got to ensure that we stay in the European Union so that we can trade with Europe and the rest of the world. I think some people think that it's an either-or. I actually think it's both. I also think there are some social issues that Europe actually created legislation and regulation that supports maternity rights, equality, and as part of the European Union, those are irrevocable. Okay. But ultimately, this country needs to be at every top table it can be at. That's its history and that's its future. And so the idea of walking away from one of the largest market in the world, I think would be very foolish.
Thank you for that, Philip Davies.
Well, there's a number of reasons why we need to leave, not least because it's the only way we can properly control immigration into the country. But above all else, we would be better off out of the EU. Every single year, the EU is a smaller and smaller part of the world's economy. All of the growth in the world economy is in China, India, South America, emerging economies in Africa. That's where all the future growth in the world economy is going to come from, and that's where we need to be. We built our wealth in this country by being global traders. And we should be ashamed of ourselves that we're handing over £19 billion a year to be part of a backward-looking, inward-facing protection racket, which is what the European Union's become, protecting the interests of inefficient European businesses and French farmers. We've got to be much more global in outlook, much more international, much more positive about the world, not stuck in the 1970s. And of course, we all want to trade with the EU. Okay. We will keep free trade with the EU.
You both had a little more than 30 seconds, but not too much more. Laura Sands, you say we should stay in to trade. Why couldn't we trade if we were outside the EU?
Well, firstly, I think that we should be trading with Europe and the rest of the world. I have more ambition.
No, but what I'm asking is why couldn't we continue I mean, Switzerland is not inside the EU, but per capita exports 5 times as much as we do to the EU. Yeah. So why couldn't we export?
Well, I'm not sure what I call the twilight zone, sort of half in and half out, is a very good option. I mean, Philip rightly talks about migration. Actually, they have a higher percentage of migration.
Yeah, but I'm sorry, you're not answering. I'm not asking about migration. I'm asking you why we couldn't continue to trade with the EU even if we were outside it.
We could if we had a Norwegian or Swiss model. But we are not there setting the rules. We've got our neighbours setting the rules for us. We end up having to comply on a sector-by-sector basis. It will take 10 years to get the agreements in place. But on the migration issue, Switzerland
I'm sorry, I'm going to come on to the migration. I want to stick with the trade for the minute, come on to cost and then migration. On the issue, we would continue to trade with the EU outside, but we would have no say in the rules of the game. At the moment, we helped to build the rules of the game. Indeed, we helped to build the single market. Why would you give that up?
Well, there's 2 points. The first is I'm not sure that we have as much influence as that would suggest. I mean, very often we go to the European Union and we're outvoted because it's all done by qualitative majority voting.
We created the single market.
And so, yes, but in all of these things where the rules are being set, more often than not, we're outvoted. So we're not actually having a great say over the rules. The other point, actually, is that this idea that we could only negotiate as good a deal as Switzerland and Norway is for the birds. We're the 5th or 6th biggest economy in the whole world. Now, we can have a much better deal than anybody else. Last year, we had a balance of trade deficit with the EU of £62 billion. So when people talk about all the jobs that are reliant on trade with the EU in this country, there are lots of jobs reliant on that. We're not going to stop that. But how many more jobs in the EU are dependent on trade with us?
Sure.
So Germany are never going to give up trade in BMWs and Mercedes into the UK. And so we can negotiate a very good deal for ourselves in terms of trade from outside of the
What's
EU
the answer to
because
that?
they need us more than we need them.
Laura.
Well, you've just said that Switzerland actually trades more with Europe than we do. So there is actually, that's not a sort of very robust argument. But fundamentally, we need it all. We need to be trading internationally, but we need that trade and we need to have a say. And the idea that we don't have a say, we set standards in this country for all sorts of different things, both within the EU and internationally. It is absolutely crucial that our businesses have a say over the sorts of terms and agreements by which that they will trade with Europe.
Can
All
I
right,
just say-
I want to move on to the migration issue because I know you both want to talk about that as well, and I promised that we would. Let me take Switzerland again as an example. Not a member of the EU, but pretty much has open borders with the EU in its arrangement. And if we were to come to a non-membership arrangement, that is probably what Brussels would continue to demand of us. In any post-membership arrangement, our borders would have to continue to be porous.
Well, I don't accept that analysis.
It's the Swiss position.
As I've said at the outset, I think that we can do far better than Switzerland, given that the EU is far more dependent on trading with us than we are of trading with them. So I don't accept that we can only negotiate a Swiss or a Norwegian deal. At the moment, we have absolutely no control over our borders whatsoever. The Prime Minister can set as many targets as he likes on immigration, knowing full well that there's nothing he can do to stop people coming into this country. We are taking people into this country in numbers that we cannot sustain. We cannot build the houses for them, they put a strain on our public services, and there's nothing, literally nothing, that the government can do to stop it. We need to leave the EU to control our borders.
Laura Sands.
I don't dispute that migration is an issue, but coming out of the EU or this twilight position isn't going to help it. If we want control over our borders, we will have to build a border between North and South Ireland. We will have to have visa control. If we want to trade with the rest of the world, we're going to have to relax those visa controls because otherwise we will not get free trade agreements. Ultimately, if the worst of all worlds, in my view, is a Swiss and Norwegian version, and they will not allow us to have access to the single market without free movement of labour.
Well, of course they're going to allow us to have access to I can't make this point often enough, that they're going to have to allow us free access to the single market because Germany are not going to give up selling BMWs and Mercedes into the UK. But Laura talks about how we need to have an input into all of these rules, but we need to trade with the rest of the world. We have no say over trade deals with the rest of the world at the moment because they're all decided for us by the EU without any input from the UK whatsoever. So if we want to have all of the advantages of trade around the world and relationships around the world, let's be there negotiating ourselves because at the moment we have no say over
Germany
that.
trades in countries where some of our diplomats don't even know how to spell the names. I mean, we are not restricted. Germany is not restricted by being part of the Euro.
Well, if Germany
There's
can
no
do it, Germany
problem.
exports,
We can have it all.
Germany exports
from where we are.
billions to East Asia, which last time I looked was not in the European Union. So being a member of the EU doesn't stop Germany. What would stop us?
No, what we're stopped from doing is negotiating our own trade deals.
But so is Germany.
Yes,
But they're still able to export masses to
absolutely.
China, Japan,
Well,
South Korea,
the argument,
Singapore.
The argument works in reverse. China seems to be doing pretty well exporting to the
Well,
EU
that's
without
what
being
free
part
trade
of the
is about.
without being part of the EU. The point is, the EU negotiates the trade terms largely for the benefit of Germany. If we want to negotiate our own trade deal with India or the Commonwealth or other countries in South America, we're not allowed to do so. The EU has to negotiate those trade deals for us.
We are part of the EU. We are a member of the EU. And if our
128th.
voice isn't being heard loud enough, then that's our responsibility. But ultimately, I think it is. And we actually have had quite a few trade commissioners who have been British and have actually signed some very
isn't
important
our voice
deals.
quite strong when it comes to trade negotiations? Because if you take the current negotiations between the EU and the United States, TTIP is the acronym, to create a huge free market. It's very controversial. A lot of people are against it. But that is a British initiative. I mean, Britain has been pushing to have this free trade area. And we negotiate as part of the EU, which is big and economically powerful, with the United States, which is big and economically powerful. Don't we get more when two big people negotiate together than a smaller one and a big one?
We are big. We're the 5th or 6th largest economy in the world.
Small compared to
and
America.
the problem with this negotiation as part of one of 28 is that inevitably you go at the pace of the slowest. And so actually, given that we are committed free traders in the UK and given that countries like America are committed free traders, it's absolutely inevitable that we would have negotiated a better free trade agreement with the US long before the EU ever came to the table, because they always go at the pace of the slowest.
Switzerland, to come back to where we started, Switzerland has a trade arrangement with China, which is negotiated individually.
Yes.
And Switzerland exports a lot more to China than we do. Surely we could, Britain, its history, seafaring, global trader, we could negotiate our own agreements, couldn't we not?
Yes, we could, but actually what we've got is we've got the leverage of the European Union collectively, but we have shaped a lot of this agenda about international trade. And I would say that if you think about what America is looking for, they're looking for a European, I mean, they're excited about TTIP from the UK's perspective. The UK would be the place that they would come for foreign investment to access those European
I'm going to have
markets.
to interrupt and leave it there. I thank you both. I think we've given our viewers a taste of things to come in this debate between now and the referendum. Thank you. It's just